Good morning, good evening, good whatever it is where you are. Hope all is well in your world, and welcome to Coffee and Clausewitz episode. What episode are we on? Four.
Oh, yeah.
Four, yeah. Our sincere apologies for a failure to upload anything last week, dear listeners, all three of you. There was a few mix-ups at my work, and we weren't able to get this episode that you're currently about to bask in recorded.
Oh, nice.
Bask.
Mm.
So we weren't able to get anything up. This week we are talking about the impact of gunpowder on empire and European expansionism outside of Europe. Barney, as ever, will be talking about the tactics, operational dynamics, battles, and all that good stuff, the stuff everybody actually turns up to listen to. I will be talking about banking.
And I think within that also we're going to approach it from slightly different directions, in that I think Harry's going to mainly focus on how expansion affected Europeans and European warfare.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm going to look at how it affected indigenous societies and indigenous warfare. So we're trying to cover both bases in that respect.
But again, huge area, so I might need this will probably be a couple of episodes worth. So I'll go first this week, if you like. Mine's not as long.
Not at all.
I think it lays some good groundwork for how certainly the English, come British, were able to pay for all this in the first place. And it's a subject that we've both alluded to throughout this series, is the financing and institutional developments that go along with gunpowder. And I think we've explained bits and pieces, but I just wanted to talk briefly about the formation of, again, I'm so sorry, I know it's a military history podcast. I'm going to talk about the formation of central banks, because and how warfare is paid for on credit instead of solely tax revenue, and which is a new dynamic for. I'll qualify that. Monarchs, rulers, and magnates had always borrowed money from bankers and money lenders in order to finance this, that, and the other.
Mm-hmm.
By the end of the 17th century, we see a model where a state essentially borrows against its own future revenue, which is how central banking has continued for ever since, and which is why the term the national debt appears within 30-40 years of formation of the Bank of England in 1694. And the fact that a monarch or a government does not instantly have to cough up the money either from their own revenues or from whatever they've been able to cobble together from creditors around Europe instantly, straight away, for whatever venture, enables increasingly far-fetched expansion and expensive and prolonged warfare and campaigns. And so off we go. I'm going to take you all back to 1688. So we're following the Glorious Revolution. William of Orange is proclaimed King of England. Over the next,
and he was Dutch.
He was absolutely Dutch. There is a statue 3 miles from where I live. Yeah, he was absolutely Dutch. Now we don't need to go talking about why the Restoration and Glorious Revolution and what have you happened. What we do need to know is that between 1688 and 1715, Britain is involved in two very, very expensive wars. By this point, Louis XIV has replaced, France's Louis XIV has replaced Spain as Europe's dominant, certainly the dominant land power. And during the 9 Years' War between 1688 and 1697, and the War of the Spanish Succession, guess what that was about? Between 1702 and 1713, England is heavily engaged on the continent, and in the 9 Years' War is actually it was fought in America and off the coast of India. It's actually sometimes referred to as the first World War, certainly in a European context.
And in Ireland.
Oh, absolutely. Well remembered, Barnstable. So in 1690, this is obviously during the 9 Years' War, there is a naval battle off the coast of England called the Battle of Beachy Head, in which the Royal Navy gets trounced. It does not go well for England at all. It gets
that didn't happen, Harry. Royal Navy has never lost a battle.
Sorry, we're in post-Brexit Britain. Yeah, I forgot. Whoopsie daisy. Anyway, the Royal Navy most definitely did lose, and we needed a new one. William's Wish Wellingtons dictated that we needed a new navy pretty quickly.
Okay.
The government, in short, needed to raise £1.2 million to rebuild the necessary number of ships, and also arm and train the number of
God knows how much that would be in modern money.
I should have. That would have been interesting. That would have been interesting to find out. Actually, but
it must be huge. I mean, if you compare it to Victorian era, you're talking at least 10 times increase on whatever.
Well,
people are talking about back then.
20 years later, during the War of the Spanish, not even 20 years later, £2 million per annum of government expenditure was considered pretty extravagant, as in we would be getting public accounts committees going to see where all the money was going. So, yeah, £1.2 million was huge. Government skin doesn't have it, so the idea comes around that the government, will have a subscription from rich and wealthy landowners that you will buy a bond, you will give the government, you will lend the government some money, and it will pay it back to you with interest against the future earnings of the crown, not the crown by that point, but of Parliament, of the country, however you want it. Whatever money they could get into the coffers would then form part of your dividend.
Right. Yeah.
They raised £1.2 million. Once the idea of this is floated in autumn-ish 1694.
Right.
They raised £1.2 million. It was in 12 days or something. Of the subscription. They got enough rich and wealthy people who obviously were power brokers in Parliament as well to cough up the money. This is absolutely unheard of, and it forms the basis and the model for government expenditure, not just on the military, but for everything, for certainly every Western, and up until today. This is how government finances basically function. If we fast forward to the not by far to the War of the Spanish Succession from 1702 to 1713, the cost of that war was over £150 million, and it was all done on credit. The Bank of England, though, as an institution, is formed separate from Parliament. It has its own machinery. It has basically the possession of government budgets. It's in its early formation. It's basically what we call the Treasury. The Bank of England as an institution and the Treasury are kind of synonymous at this point. And this is December 1694. So note that down as the date of the formation of the Bank of England. and the bond would be issued at like it was quite a good return if you lent to the British government as well. So it was a two-way thing. It had an 8% annual return. I mean, you can just that alone shows you how desperate they were to get the Navy back.
Yes, yeah.
I mean,
Oh wait, so that was built into the conditions on which the bond was sold, that
yeah,
you would be given
yeah,
an 8%
yeah,
return.
yeah, exactly.
Right. That's not just what it achieved. That was built into the mechanism of it.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly. Otherwise, they'd run out of subscribers. Yeah, they'd run out of subscribers. This is what allows the flow of money to constantly keep going. And
right. I see.
I mean, as I said before, governments has always borrowed from the business community, and there had to be sufficient pull to keep the property classes sorry, that was a terrible sentence, to keep the property classes lending to the government for future ventures. And the return investments from empire and the expansion into other markets, because that's what the British Empire is based on.
Well, absolutely. I was thinking about this because obviously at this point in time, in terms of tax, you don't have much. I mean, income tax doesn't exist, for example. Income tax is brought in to pay for another war, the American War of Independence. And it was brought in as a temporary measure. That went well. But it's mainly on the tax is mainly on imports and exports, as I recall.
That's what I was just going to say. There's quite a well-developed framework for customs and excise.
That's the phrase that pays.
But you're absolutely correct as far as a domestic tax base is concerned, and the rest of England's not on its own here in this situation. Every state in Europe that I can think of was in the same situation. And this is why certainly 16th, 17th century warfare, I think we've mentioned this before, seems to follow this pattern of you go to war, everybody goes bankrupt, and then you have to come to an uneasy peace, or until the next or until you can afford to keep going again the next campaign season, because there's only a finite amount of capital that can be cycled round to keep. There's only a certain number of coins, put it that way. To keep people paid. Whereas this, it's theoretically
right. I mean, you don't even really have paper currency at this point.
Nope.
No, it's not really a thing.
I mean, that's what the bond was. That's how paper currency starts.
Right. Right. Interesting.
Remember, have we still got them on our £10 notes? I promised to pay the bearer of this note £10 in gold.
Oh, we probably do. We might well.
That's where it comes from. That's literally where it comes from.
Oh, right.
You'd have your name on it and blah blah blah, and that's where our paper money comes from exactly this period. But with this new model, which is taken up, starts in England, and is taken up by the rest of the world over the next 200 years or so, your revenues are theoretically infinite if you just say, yeah, we'll pay it back later, because that's essentially all the government's. So long as the government hasn't collapsed and it has noticeable revenues and it can pay the interest, very important. I mean, actually, we'll get onto that, because throughout the 18th century, the debt burden massively grows, and it's not that it goes unnoticed. People are wondering how on earth the country is ever going to pay this debt off, essentially to itself. By the time, certainly by the time of the 7 Years' War, between 1756 and 63, 50% of government revenue is going on servicing the debt.
Oh wow!
Just on the national debt, yeah. And by the end of that war, the debt's climbed to £140 million. So that we've essentially borrowed against it. We've essentially borrowed against ourselves. But and this is before we worked out. Not me and you, Barnstable. We weren't there.
No,
we weren't there. that economists worked out that you can essentially keep this cycle going forever. But in the 18th, in the
Oh, of course, you had the kind of Malthusian
oh yeah, there was
viewpoint at this point.
yeah,
Yeah.
It was a genuine fear that everything would collapse if you just kept borrowing against yourself. But yeah, we're about 100 years. Yeah, we're quite a long time before it's worked out by governments that actually it's fine. We'll just say we'll pay it back later, so long as the government has good credit, just like you or I as a private citizen. Never ever conflate sovereign debt with private debt. That's led Europe into a little bit of trouble over that.
Indeed. Yeah.
let's not talk about that, Angela.
No, but it's an interesting point. I mean, this is a really key argument running through American politics right from the absolute start of the nation.
Sure.
To bring on something I know a bit about as a comparison, but you have the kind of the Alexander Hamilton view.
Yeah.
That national debt is actually very good as long as you can afford to pay, as you say, as long as you can afford to pay the interest.
Yeah.
Yeah. In many ways, it's a positive actually. And opposed to that, you have the kind of the Thomas Jefferson view that any debt is bad basically, and that because it also increases the size and the reach of the government, because the more interest you have to pay, the more revenue the government has to raise, which means the more taxation, and so on and so forth. And so the less debt you have, the smaller the government is, which is obviously the kind of the Jeffersonian viewpoint.
And these debates are both of those debates are you see them in England at various times as well. Certainly at the close of wars, when states are looking at just how much money has been spent, thinking how on earth we're going to even begin to service this debt, and what apparatus we're going to have to develop to do it.
Absolutely,
But France, by contrast, which doesn't have these mechanisms, and it farms out the paying for of navies, for example, during the 7 Years' War to its landed class, to its aristocracy, who then obviously farm it, who then obviously push costs further back down the chain, or the social chain onto ordinary people. It's genuinely and with good reason cited as one of the almost universal grievances across the Kingdom of France, the measures imposed following the 7 Years' War to pay for to pay the debts, to pay the government's debts, because it doesn't have a central credit mechanism. It's seen as a cause of the well, it was a cause of the French Revolution, because they haven't anywhere near got over it by 1789, and they compounded it by that point with the interventions in America.
Oh, absolutely, yes, yeah. And I think it was the French. I can't properly remember, but they basically guaranteed American currency at this point. So when Americans were trading in the world during the War of Independence, it was underwritten by the French Treasury, basically. I think it was the French. It might have been the Spanish. I think it was the French, but it could have been the Spanish. I'm not entirely sure, but it was one of the two.
No, so this is good. We're already getting into Atlantic Europe, because this is how England pays for works out that it can pay for. I don't want to say expansion, but it can pay for its foreign policy. Put it that way.
But no, you're absolutely right too. When you're talking about the 7 Years' War, for example, the guy who led that was Pitt the Elder, was the great leader during the 7 Years' War. And during the 7 Years' War, we conquer most of the French Empire, most of the Caribbean islands, Canada. We take most of their possessions in India. But when it comes to the peace treaty, Pitt has been forced out of office by this point, and the Prime Minister, a chap called Lord Bute, who went to Leiden, funnily enough.
Of course he did.
Yeah. He takes Canada off the French, and he gives them back Guadeloupe in the Caribbean. Guadeloupe at this point was the most profitable piece of earth on in the world
How so?
because it was just basically a massive sugar plantation,
Oh,
and that is the
that's
crop.
gold. Yeah, of course, that's
Yeah,
the mid 18th century. Yeah.
yeah, it is. What oil certainly used to be like 10, 20 years ago. That is, what Guadeloupe is to the world economy, and we gave it straight back to the French. And Pitt was absolutely incandescent with rage that we'd taken Canada, which has a lot of, moose and wheat
We've
fields,
got
and that's
beavers and trees, bro.
yeah, exactly, yeah, exactly. I mean, the beaver trade was pretty big, but it did collapse by the early 1800s. But yeah, and then we gave the sugar straight back to the French, so they were doing, relatively speaking,
Phew.
okay. Yeah, massive mistake, absolutely massive mistake in that respect.
So what? We've established that Britain can now just keep all this going on a rolling basis ish, apart from when it's giving away the jewels in the crown to the French at the Treaty of Paris.
Absolutely, yeah.
In 1763. What have you got for us, Barnstable?
Okay, great. So talking about the Seven Years' War, I thought we'd look at a battle called the Battle of the Monongahela River. Battle of the Monongahela River in 1755. So if you're trying to place this, if you've ever seen the film Last of the Mohicans with
Oh
Daniel
yeah,
Day-Lewis, yeah, great
so
film.
dashing.
Oh, very, yeah. Um, it's set within that conflict. So we're
Yeah.
talking about exactly that kind of thing. So the Battle of the Monongahela River takes place in 1755, 10 miles east of what is now Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania. Pittsburgh at the time didn't exist. It was a French fort called Fort Duquesne, I think is how you pronounce it. So it was between a British army supplemented with colonial militia on one side, commanded by a General Edward Braddock, and French troops with their Indian allies on the other side under a Captain Daniel de Bourgeois. Now, given that one army is commanded by a general and the other is commanded by a
I
captain,
was just
that
going to
kind of,
say,
yeah, that gives you an idea. Actually, the numbers are fairly even. Braddock did have a much larger army, but he'd split it in two because it was so difficult. They basically had to cut a road through the forest to Fort Duquesne. So he split his army up and took a flying column of about flying, as it was called, of about 1,300 men forwards, detached from the main body. So there were 800 French and Indians, overwhelmingly Indians, sorry, Native Americans, and 1,300 British regular troops and colonial militia. The colonial militia included a young, I think he was a colonel at this point in the militia, only about 23 years old, by the name of George Washington, who
oh,
is at this.
really?
Yes, yeah,
Oh,
who is at this particular battle.
I
In
thought you were
fact,
going to say Mel Gibson.
yeah,
Benjamin Martin. Benjamin
yeah,
Martin.
awful film. Um, it's quite interesting in terms of the 7 Years' War. You can argue that George Washington in 1754 actually sets the whole thing off, but that's a different um, sort of argument to get into. That yeah, so importantly, Braddock didn't think much of Native Americans, and his entire army, he only took eight. He took eight to act as scouts and guides from a local tribe called the Mingos, and that was it. Whereas the French army, it's a misnomer to call it the French army because it's overwhelmingly consists of Native Americans. Now, by this point, obviously 1755, European settlers have been living alongside Native Americans for almost 150 years
Yeah.
in North America. So there has been what we call the Columbian Exchange, named after Christopher Columbus, where Europe gets things like tobacco and the potato and all these kind of things from America, and we give Native Americans gunpowder, and we give them horses and almost every disease you can think of,
Yeah.
which
Yeah.
completely rips through them, sometimes deliberately, which completely rips through their population. And it's estimated, I can't remember the figures off the top of my head, but within the first 100 years of contact with Europeans, as much as in some areas, as much as 80% of the Native American
Are you
population.
quoting guns, germs, and steel here? Because the figure I read from that was within that 150-year period, was it that northeast coast, the eastern coast of America, which went into the plains, which had a population of, we think, about 20 million Native Americans, had been reduced to just over 1 million, mainly by disease. And the importation of European diseases, because the domestication of livestock wasn't so much of, or certainly in the variety that the Europeans did it, and which meant the number of contagions that Europeans had been exposed to on average. Don't get me wrong, most people died in Europe at the age of 40 as well. It wasn't.
Oh yeah, but in terms of population reproduction was far higher in Europe.
Sure.
Europeans live in cities, so yeah, well, we think of Europe at this point as being quite rural, but it's still, still more cities than you have in North America. So there is an immunity built up to certain diseases, or in terms of the population, there's a sort of an immunity level that Native Americans just don't have at all.
That's the better way of putting it.
Yeah, absolutely.
They haven't gone away. It's just they're more. Yeah, there's at least a level of immunity that just isn't there within the Native Americans. Sorry, I just went off on a tangent.
No, but it's a really interesting part of it. There were Native American cultures and civilizations, especially in the Mississippi Valley, that were very rich and quite advanced, and that are just absolutely devastated by, as I say, mainly by disease. Warfare is really just an accessory to it.
Yeah,
certainly at this point.
It's simple contact.
Absolutely, yeah.
Damage, yeah, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so by 1755, they've been in contact with gunpowder for a long time. Native American military tactics have changed a fair bit in response to this. So certainly if you're looking at the East Coast, there was a tradition prior to the arrival of the Europeans of Native Americans basically making mass charges at each other. That doesn't happen anymore because of the use of gunpowder.
Yeah.
They also wore a kind of armor, which they stopped using pretty soon after Europeans arrived. So yes, so our traditional image is kind of the Native American basically naked, apart from like a loincloth or something around the waist. That's what we've got to by this point in 1755, and they have the cool, Mohicans and all that sort kind of thing. And obviously, it's a very different style of warfare. Native Americans are not lining up in ranks to blast, like 7 shades of hell out of each other.
Yeah.
They are hiding behind the trees. They're doing what we would recognize as guerrilla warfare.
Yeah.
Now, Braddock, the French, primarily, I think, because they couldn't send as many troops to Canada, which they owned at the time, so they're always outnumbered, had to rely very heavily on their Native American allies. And so they adopted the Native American style of warfare, whereas the British could send a lot more troops to North America. Plus, they had the 13 colonies has a much bigger population than Canada, so it can supply more men to the militia. And there was a sense in the British Army, as I say, because they didn't need Native Americans as much, that kind of style of warfare is dishonorable. It's not, how men should fight, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And this is exactly what we see with the Battle of the Monongahela. So the British flying column is marching to Fort Duquesne to try and put it under siege. The French and their Native American allies decide to preempt this, so they send these 800 men out under Captain de Beaujeu to surprise them, to lay an ambush on the road. It doesn't quite work out as planned because they blunder into the British advance guard before they've had time to set the ambush. De Beaujeu is killed in the first volley. But the Native Americans and their French allies take to the trees and they start firing at the British. And the British respond. They initially panic and kind of mill about. You've got to think this is on a narrow road in the middle
Yeah.
of a dense forest, and so initially they're running about a bit pell-mell. The officers impose discipline. It's broken down in terms of traditional companies, traditional regiments. So it's kind of like you men there getting into a line, that kind of thing. And they form ranks and they start blasting into the trees. And it doesn't really work out as you can imagine. But they keep doing this. They're even firing artillery pieces into the forest. Um, they're just getting shot down. Native Americans also took scalps of some of the soldiers, which I'm sure most listening will know. But if you don't, that's where you take a knife and you basically cut off the top of somebody's the skin on top of your skull with the hair attached, and then you nail it to and then they nailed it to a tree. Normally, this is done when your enemy is dead. It can be done to people alive. People have survived being scalped. That is a possibility, and yeah, it's very grisly. There's a whole industry actually over scalps. Scalps were used to prove that you'd killed somebody. So, for example, if a Native American brought a scalp back to his village, if he brought back enough scalps, that meant he proved himself as a warrior, and that meant he would certainly in the West, in the Great Plains, that then meant that he would be allowed to marry. Sexual relations were very closely monitored and circumscribed in Native American society, and you were basically allowed to marry. It was a polygamous society. You could have as many wives as as you wanted, as you could financially support, or support in there.
Yeah.
I mean, horses is really the kind of finance in that sense. But yeah, and the way you prove this was with scalps, effectively. Also on the European side or on the settler side, in the West, they used to have basically gangs of kind of desperados and outlaws who used to ride about. Certainly in the Southwest, what's modern day New Mexico, Arizona, Texas,
Yeah.
the northern parts of modern day Mexico, local towns would basically give out bounties or scalps, and it would be something on the lines of $20 for a male scalp, $10 for a female scalp, and quite a lot, and $5 for an infant scalp. So I know, yeah. So
that's horrible.
I know.
Oh.
So you would have you would have gangs riding about trying to find Native Americans, shoot them up, kill them, scalp them, take the scalps into a local, they'd mainly be a Mexican town at this point, and claim their reward, basically. This is what was going on.
This is making me really sad.
You can fit. Oh, yeah. I mean, if we ever go further forward with this, and I tell you about the Sand Creek massacre in 1864, that will make you sad, and it will probably make you throw up as well.
Let's do that next week.
Yeah,
Good mood before we started this.
That is disgusting. That is disgusting. Anyway, so back to the Monongahela. The British are on this road. They're forming their ranks up. They're firing away. They keep getting shot down. Some of the colonial militia run into the trees, and the British end up shooting them as well because they're just firing pell-mell into the trees. How long do you reckon this went on for, Harry? This particular situation?
Something like that. 4 hours or something.
Yeah, you're close. 3 hours. 3 hours it goes on. General Braddock is riding around, commanding his troops. He's about the only bloke on a horse at this point in the battle. He's had about 5 horses shot from under him.
Okay.
So it's quite bizarre when you look at the casualty figures and then you consider how long he survived.
How did they constantly get mixed up between the general and the horse? I think I'd have been shooting at the person on it. Like,
This is what this is
yeah,
what I'm saying.
maybe
Eventually, after 3 hours, he's mortally wounded. He died a few days later. And at that point, British resistance collapsed and everyone runs away. It's a pell-mell retreat back to the main body of the column. Funnily enough, George Washington basically ends up in command, weirdly enough, and pulls the troops out of there. The Native Americans did not pursue. Pursuit isn't really a part of Native American warfare. That's a whole different thing that we could maybe get into if we've got time. But they stayed behind to scalp the dead and to loot their bodies and drink a lot of captured rum that they'd come across. The Native Americans were rather fond of the fire water, as they called it, which is such a cool name. I think we should start calling alcohol fire water.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah. But right, so in terms of casualties, so the British have 1,300 men engaged. They suffered nearly 900 casualties out of 1,300.
That's pretty savage.
Yeah, the French and the Native Americans had 800 men engaged. And how many men do you think they lost?
With that lack of fire discipline and just 50.
Close, 43.
I'm good at this today. I'm on
Yeah,
today. Like just pulling random numbers out of the air. Brilliant. Well done, Harry. Self 5. That did just happen.
So this illustrates at this time period the essential difference between European and Native American warfare. The Europeans, they line up in their ranks, they blast away, in the assumption that you'll kill, not even that you'll kill enough, but the morale will break and the other side will run, basically. And the Native Americans fight in a lot more what we'd call a guerrilla style, a kind of skirmish style.
Yeah. And it's interesting because they're both technologically aligned. They're just using different tactics. But the British model only works if the other one wants to play. If the other side wants to play like that.
Yeah, exactly. So if you look at the 7 Years' War, the majority of field engagements end in British defeat. The British are eventually successful because they work this out, and they just go to besiege the main French forts. There's only one battle that's fought in a kind of a European style, as I recall, which is the Battle of the Plains of Abraham outside the city of Quebec in 1759, and that does end in an overwhelming victory because you're fighting a European-style battle, and in that the British, as we discussed before, in terms of the firepower, the training techniques, etc., the British are just superior, so they win that battle. But most battles that are fought in the open
don't go well for the British.
They do not. So eventually they work this out and they just avoid them and they just focus on siege warfare and taking the French from then on.
Do the British try to raise any kind of units to fight the either the Native Americans or the French on kind of their own terms in this kind of more loose and I'd say dynamic where the use of cover, etc., in a way that we, like you say, now recognise as guerrilla warfare? Did they try and adapt to that style of warfare, or was that cultural prejudice of this is not how real armies or real men should fight wars? Did that hold a bit too true, and the solution was in then just avoiding contact out of their own terms?
It was kind of a bit of both. So they did raise at least one group that I know of to combat this by adopting the style of warfare, which was a group called Rogers Rangers, commanded by a guy called Richard Rogers or Robert Rogers. It was anyway.
Roger Rogers.
Maybe Roger Rogers, yeah, maybe.
Let's go with that. Makes me happy.
Yeah, let's go with Roger Rogers. But did they? They might have on campaign. But these are effectively, when you we talked about Last of the Mohicans, just think of Daniel Day-Lewis's character from Last of the Mohicans. These are guys who speak Native American. They're all frontiersmen. So they've grown up on the frontier effectively. They speak the local Native American languages. They're equipped with the same weapons. So yes, the rifle, which Native Americans have by this point, but also, recognizably Native American weapons like the tomahawk they're carrying, for example.
Yeah.
They wore moccasins. They didn't wear, boots.
So there is a degree of kind of tactical osmosis.
Oh yeah,
then, because
and
the only reason I ask is that's normal in warfare.
Yes, absolutely.
Thought process.
But they're used very much in an auxiliary position to mount raids into rear areas. There's no idea that we're going to start fighting the entire campaign in this manner.
Sure.
They're very much used as a support to raid mainly Native American villages and try and lower their morale.
Cool.
So yeah.
And you say these guys were frontiersmen. They'd already they weren't British soldiers that were repurposed. They were already born in. Obviously not. They all bought this. They all spoke the languages and knew the terrain, which is exactly what you want from those kinds of units.
Yeah, absolutely.
Good. Okay. Well, I think. Sorry if that sounded a little bit disjointed on my half, people. Like I was trying to explain how Britain would be able to continue to send, because you said Britain was able to deploy a lot more soldiers to theatre, and what my aim was to illustrate how that was financially viable for the British at this point. And then Barney gave that brilliant expose of what warfare was actually like between Europeans and non-Europeans, and the adaptive processes that were gone through by militaries as institutions there and on the ground.
And this carries on, just to make a final point. And you get to, surprise, the American Civil War. At the Battle of Pea Ridge in 1862, the Confederate Army is made up of what we would recognize as regular troops drilled in a European style. But there are also about 2,000 Native Americans who form part of this Confederate Army. And in the battle, you have the Union lines and the Confederate lines stood up, blasting at each other, as you would expect. And the Native Americans are just off to the side, in their skirmishing formation, effectively, still fighting in that manner. So it continues until you have the final defeat of Native Americans on the continent.
Sure. Oh, fascinating. So having focused this week on America in this sort of late 17th century and into the 18th century context, how about next week we go east and see what happens in should we start with India?
Yeah, cool. Yeah, absolutely.
So next week's episode will be when the impact of European style warfare on and in what we would now call the subcontinent of India.
Mm-hmm.
And that's about it from me. Barnstable, Greaves, anything?
No, I'd say I'm about done. Certainly in terms of North American warfare, we might want
we'll be back in America.
Absolutely.
At some point.
Yeah.
So thank you ever so much for listening, everybody, and we will see you next week in India and in the
absolutely.
Thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.